Does the work we do every day as accountants make a difference? Today's guest is PCAOB board member George Botic, and his answer to that question might surprise you.
You read articles, we've probably all read articles that say students want a career with a purpose, a why that they can feel good about. But when I think about what the accounting profession does, and in particular financial statement auditor does and brings, just mentioned, I can't think of really a higher purpose or even a calling.
Hello and welcome to the Lease Alert, where we have conversations with the smartest, most interesting people at the intersection of real estate, leasing, and accounting. I'm your host, Matt Waters. Let's learn something together.
Great to be with you. Great to be with all your listeners. It's important topics, whether it's lease accounting, whether it's auditing, which is where the PCAOB intersects more directly, but ultimately it's about the financial reporting process in the capital markets and investors and other users. So it's great to be with you and be with your listeners, and looking forward to the discussion. So thank you for the invite.
So George, it is an honor, and I can prove it to you that it's an honor because this is the first time in my entire life that I have put on a blazer for a meeting from my home office. Now I call it the Lease Accounting World Studio, but most people would call it my home office. Yeah, I knew you were going to suit up, so I wanted to wear a blazer for this meeting today. So just to get started here, I wanted to talk about the PCAOB. And I'll say I've worked in industry or corporate accounting for most of my career. I started at EY, but for most of my career, I've worked in industry, mostly at large multi-billion-dollar companies. So I've become quite familiar with the SEC, 10K filings and that kind of thing. Familiar with FASB, particularly for me in the lease accounting space, ASC 842. Honestly, I haven't been exposed as much to the PCAOB. So I thought we would start today and let me just ask you, what's the history and purpose of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the PCAOB?
That's a great question, Matt, and thank you. Before I get into the question, just give our quick disclaimer that the views I expressed this morning during our discussion are in my official capacity as an individual board member of the PCAOB and do not necessarily reflect the views of the full board, the full 5-member board, my fellow board members, or the PCAOB's dedicated and hardworking staff. So with that out of the way, these are just my views. But your question, which is great, because a lot of folks, even though the PCAOB has been around for over 20 years now, and I've been here, it's scary to say, over 21 of those years, so living it and breathing it, but it's still not well known, even by folks, I think, at least some folks in the accounting kind of ecosystem more broadly. So just to dive into that, and maybe to set the stage, anyone that, through college, through studies, or reading the press knows, unfortunately, over time, looking back over the arc of history, there have been from time to time financial challenges, financial crises, if you want to say it that way, where auditing and accounting have been at the forefront. And going back over a long period of time. But thinking about my career and being at a firm, an auditor by training, in the late 1990s, to date myself, we had the dot-com bubble that happened. And then after that, maybe more importantly to your question, we had a series of financial events. The Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Adelphia kind of happened in very quick succession, if you will, during that time period. A lot of folks now, this is ancient history, I'll say, but for those of us that were in the profession, around the profession at that time, those memories are still pretty vivid. And while there have been a number of these events, the events in WorldCom, Enron in particular, the impact of the capital markets was somewhat unprecedented in the size, scale, scope. Generally speaking, with Enron, the 67 or so billion dollars in market value was lost to shareholders. About $2 billion in retirement assets of their employees were lost. WorldCom cost their shareholders, again, using some round numbers, about $180 billion. So very significant events happen again in kind of close succession. And it's always interesting to me when you think about politics and whatnot, not that this is a political statement at all, but during that time period, Sarbanes-Oxley, the bill all became the act, was working its way through Congress. It was passed near unanimous, signed by then President George W. Bush very quickly. So I think that near unanimous support really reflected what was being lost in the capital markets, and that something had to change. And many things came out of Sarbanes-Oxley, not just the PCAOB, but many reporting requirements for companies, certifications, which I think all have collectively, in my view, have helped the financial reporting ecosystem strengthen it. But I will say two things for purposes of this just quickly. One was the creation of the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. That the broad purpose of the PCAOB is to, I'll say somewhat simply, but simply oversee the audits of public companies. We may call them issuers, but public companies, to protect investors and further the public interest in the preparation of informative, accurate, and independent audit reports. So investor protection is kind of at the heart of what we do. The other thing that's a little more technical, I'll say, but equally important, is up to the PCAOB's formation and creation, the auditing profession, and it is a profession, was self-regulated. So there was a peer review process, which still exists, where one firm would inspect or review another firm's audit work. Well, now with the PCAOB being, quote, an independent oversight, less independent of the profession, that self-regulation, at least to the public company audits, is now overseen by the PCAOB. I will say, when you move forward from 2002, it gets a little more current. The Bernie Madoff scandal, the Ponzi scheme, if you will, which is, again, a little more recent history, coming out of Dodd-Frank, the PCAOB's jurisdiction was expanded to include the oversights, not just of public companies, but now also the auditors of brokers and dealers, which includes oversight of compliance reports that are filed in accordance with or pursuant to the securities laws. So our jurisdiction expanded out of 2010 to the Bernie Madoff matter. A couple other points, Matt, that might be of interest and relevance. From a PCAOB perspective, Sarbanes had a lot of very broad words, if you will, a lot of broad areas to focus on. So really, there's four things the PCAOB was and is tasked to do. We register firms. So any accounting firm that wants to audit a publicly listed company, in general anyway, needs to be registered with the PCAOB. And that includes not only U.S. firms, but also could include firms, and does, many firms outside the U.S. I think we have firms that are registered across 83 different jurisdictions. So you think about big companies in maybe Switzerland or London or in Japan, wherever it might be, that are also listed on a U.S. exchange. Those auditors would need to be registered with the PCAOB. Right now, we have about 1,540 or so firms that are registered. That number moves around. So step one is we register firms. The second area that was tasked to us is inspections, inspect audit firms. Now, I've spent most of my career in and around inspections, as you heard at the beginning. So inspections is still very near and dear to my heart. And we look at the headcount of the PCAOB, over 50% of our staff members are focused on inspections or around inspections. So we're very inspection centric. In fact, it's interesting, Matt, thinking back over time and interacting with prior board members, many board members in the past, and I still think of it the same way today, consider our inspection program the crown jewels of the PCAOB because we're so inspection focused. And simply put, our inspection program is designed to assess a registered firm's compliance with the applicable auditing standards, professional standards, and rules of the PCAOB and the SEC. So our inspectors are, in many respects, very simply assessing the compliance, how the firm is complying with those rules and standards. Once an inspection is done, and this may be of interest to your listeners if you haven't focused on this, is each inspection has a report. So on our website, there are thousands, literally thousands of inspection reports, whether the firm was inspected every year, such as the major firms, or inspected once every 3 years. So there's search features on our website if you're interested in looking up a specific firm. The third area is setting standards. So we register firms, inspect firms, and we have the authority under the Act to establish auditing standards or board rules, as the case may be. So we have an office of the chief auditor, and that group is responsible primarily for developing rules, standards that will become before the board, ultimately for review and approval, and then would go to the SEC as a further step. These rules, once they're in place, would be required to be followed by registered accounting firms that are performing audits of public companies. I'll just mention two rules quickly that might be of interest. Last year, last summer and then early fall, the board adopted QC 1000, which is a new QC standard, a very all-encompassing standard. It was approved by the SEC. So I know firms are beginning to think and are thinking about how to implement QC 1000. I view that as a generational standard. It sets the basis of the audit firm's work. And the other standard I'll mention is more of a rule than a standard per se, but it's AS 1000. We have QC 1000 and then AS 1000. AS 1000 is general responsibilities of the auditor. It didn't really change the underlying responsibilities of an auditor, but it repackaged and updated a number of previously existing standards. It really focuses the auditor's mind on investors and investor protection. So I thought that's also worth highlighting is something that was adopted by the board last year and is now effective. And then finally, to round this out, Matt, is the fourth area is enforcement. We have an enforcement program. Again, we register firms, inspect, set standards, and then we have an enforcement program separate and apart from inspections. So it's kind of interesting. Our inspectors are inspecting. They have certain responsibilities, and separate and apart from them is our enforcement division, mostly attorneys. There are some accountants there as well, auditors, but more attorneys in the enforcement division. They're focused on at least what I would consider the identification of more serious audit deficiencies that could pose risk to investors. To me, it's more of a deterrent, if you will, aspect of our toolbox. And similar to inspections, when orders are settled, they go on our website. So again, if folks are interested in seeing all the activity around inspections, order enforcement, or basically what all the PCAOB does, our website has a lot of good information that one can hopefully utilize for their increased knowledge and understanding of what we do at the PCAOB. So I'll pause there, Matt, but hope that's helpful to giving a thumbnail sketch of what the PCAOB does.
Yeah, extremely helpful. Thank you, George. And it's interesting that you say that the Enron debacle and all the other scandals of that same time frame back in 2001 or so, right, led to the creation of the PCAOB and now your job, because in many ways it created my job as well. And I'll explain. Actually, when it happened, it was devastating to me as an accounting professional. Well, I talked with my friend David Chabet at PwC. He joins me for a lot of webinars and podcasts too. And David and I joke about starting our accounting careers in the late 1900s, right? So I was one of those people that experienced the Enron debacle firsthand. As a matter of fact, when Enron had to go out of business, as you pointed out, right? And it was very sad. A lot of people lost their entire retirement savings, lost their jobs. I was actually in the middle of a very sweet internship at Ernst & Young, EY. And one day the partner called me into his office and we were in the tax consulting area of EY. And I was expecting that I would have my entire career at Ernst & Young, right? I enjoyed tax classes in college. I enjoyed my internship. And so I had this path laid out before me as many people do when they start their careers, right? They think, okay, it's going to be a intern, associate, senior associate, manager, senior manager, partner, right? That's kind of the way the profession works in public accounting. And I was very excited about that until Enron. And the partner called me into his office. He said, Matt, Enron is out of business. Also now Arthur Andersen is out of business. So instead of the big 5 accounting firms, we now have the big 4 accounting firms. And remember, I was in tax consulting and he said, Matt, we're not even sure we're going to be consultants anymore as auditors, right? So unfortunately, we'll help you get a job at a client, but we're not making any more full-time offers this year. So I was devastated. It was hard for me to go home and tell my wife, hey, the plans that we had about the accounting profession looks like it's not working out. But, as so many times in life, this turned out to be a blessing for me professionally, because as you pointed out, the Enron debacle created the SEC scrutiny around off-balance sheet financing. It ultimately led to lease accounting changes in ASC 842. For me too, just like for you, George, there's kind of a beauty from ashes scenario there where, now I have worked in lease accounting specifically for 20 years. I love what I do. And it all came from that accounting scandal. So I say that just to hopefully encourage somebody. I don't know what everybody's going through in your career right now, but hey, sometimes even the worst thing that happens in a given week can turn out to be the best thing that's happened in your career. So with that though, I wanted to kind of shift gears and also on an encouraging note, George, I know I mentioned that you're out and about, you go around the country speaking to college students. I see that on LinkedIn, and you're talking to accounting students, and you're trying to help. From my perspective, you're trying to help shore up the talent shortage crisis that we're in as a profession. And so I just ask you now, what do you tell the college students and young professionals about the accounting profession?
Yes, no, thank you. And also, Matt, thank you for sharing your story. That's a great story about just because one has maybe a bad day or bad week doesn't mean the rest of your life is cemented. And I think we've all experienced that in our careers to varying degrees, how things change. I mean, when I joined the firm a lifetime ago as a staff accountant and whatnot, the PCB didn't exist, right? So if I think about when I joined, I mean, did I want to work for the PCOB? Well, it didn't even exist back then. So how things can change, you just never know. But where there is change, I always think there's opportunity and encourage folks to think about that. But to your question at hand, one of the things I'll say that to lead into your question very quickly, since becoming and having the honor to be a board member in October of 2023, we've done a lot of outreach. And outreach to stakeholders, kind of all four corners of the page, if you, whether you're investors, critically important, whether you're audit committee members, preparers, the firms certainly, or the academic community, whether it's students or professors. So we've done our best to have significant, at least in my estimation, outreach, whether it's in person or obviously now virtual, like a lot of things are after COVID, kind of like this, interactions with many people, whether you love us, whether you hate us, we want to talk to everybody quite literally, because and I know I certainly benefit from hearing all kinds of views, whether it's supportive, whether it's not supportive. That's not really so much the point. It's hearing views, perspectives. I always worry about, are we missing anything? So with that, and outreach being so important, and with that, even though I'm a regulator, I will admit, and we have responsibilities, I am a big supporter and proponent of the profession. And I think we have to have a healthy, active, profitable, I'll say, profession to have audit quality. If we want to have audit quality, we have to have firms of all shapes and sizes, from the largest firms to the smallest firms. We have to have a healthy pipeline of new accountants coming from universities into those firms, again, large or small or anywhere in between. And those firms have to be financially healthy to make the investments needed. So thinking about that perspective, we've had I'll say the honors. I think it is an honor. I really do talk with a lot of students, a lot of on campus. Sometimes groups will come to the PCOB's office. They'll make tours through Washington. We actually had a meeting a week or so ago with a master's class that was going through many agencies, if you will, around DC, the AICPA included, CAQ, and we were able to meet with them. And I always really benefit from that. It's really energizing to talk with students about the profession and perspectives. And I'll say this, Matt, I think one of the aspects is to thank them. I always try to say thank you for being accounting majors. Can you congratulate them, because in many cases they will be graduating maybe in a matter of months, starting their career. So to congratulate them for going through the journey of being an accounting major, an accounting student, and then moving into the profession. And I think it's also important, and we also try to do this all the time, to really stress the vibrancy, the resiliency, and I believe the nobility of the auditing profession, the accounting profession by extension, but that the value that they'll be bringing and what they'll do in their careers really supports economic growth, supports capital formation at the end of the day, and the strength of our capital markets, which by extension supports our society, our way of life. If the capital markets aren't efficiently, least friction as possible, allocating capital, I'm not sure, we're having this conversation today, possibly. So I think that's so important. And the other thing I try to stress is, at least in my estimation, Matt, is one of the roles, if not the key roles, of the profession, particularly a financial statement auditor, is trust. And you think about why, going back to Enron WorldCom, when trust got lost, that why do, probably everyone that's listening on this webcast sending money each month or each paycheck, as the case may be, to a 401k plan or to a Fidelity or a Vanguard or investing in the Magnificent Seven, whatever it might be. Yes, we all hope we get a return for sure. Make no mistake. But we're doing that, I think, because we trust the markets. We trust that they're gatekeepers that are looking over the markets, not just the SEC maybe or the PCAOB maybe or other quote regulators, but that there are individuals, there are firms that are making sure that the numbers are the numbers. And there's some level of trust. And I think that can't be stressed enough, whether you're a sophisticated investor like a Warren Buffett or your folks on this call or teachers, firemen that are saving, for retirement, for house down payments, for college education. I think it ultimately all works because of this trust and makes the financial statement auditor such a vital pillar of a well-functioning capital market. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll pause, for the students, I try to stress, you read articles, we've probably all read articles that say students want a career with a purpose, a
Hmm.
why that they can feel good about. But when I think about what the accounting profession does, and in particular, financial statement auditor does and brings, just mention, I can't think of really a higher purpose or even a calling. I think in a way it's a calling to be a financial statement auditor to support our capital markets. And then the last point that I think wherever one goes in their career, if they're an accounting major, whether you're a financial statement auditor, you go to a firm like you started or I started, you go into a private practice or you go into a company, a prepare role or whatnot. There's a mindset that I think will pay dividends long term in one's career, such as an independence of way of thinking, professional skepticism, gaining understandings of processes and controls that doesn't necessarily come through an educational system for other curriculums, but does in accounting. So if accountant wants to do something later in his or her career, I think those pillars, if you will, that skepticism, do care, understanding controls, not just helps the transparency on the capital markets, but also could serve one as their career advances wherever it may take them. So I think there are many ways I'll come back to thank them for being an accounting major, to congratulate them for the careers they're about to start, and then the role they'll play in society, whether it's in the finance sector or they go elsewhere. I think it'll pay them dividends. So that's kind of how I'll pause, Matt, how I think about and how I'm so honored to be either in a class or just talking to professors and what's top of mind for them about the pipeline, about other research topics. So helps us immensely as we think about, so as I think about the role of the PCOB, what we're doing here.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is encouraging, right? You're right. Accounting is sometimes viewed as kind of a boring profession that's all about the numbers, right? I mean, that's the stereotype. Right here today, as we're talking, we're in the midst of busy season. Whether you're an auditor or a tax accountant, this is busy season. And so, if you meet somebody at your kid's ball game or a church or at a conference or whatever you're at, right, and you say, "Well, what do you do? What do you do?" If you lead with, "I'm a CPA," what do you always get? "Oh, I bet you're busy this time of year." And, then I have to back that up. I'm like, well, actually, I don't even do my own taxes. I hire a CPA who specializes in taxes to do my taxes for me, right? We're not all the same, you know? So now, honestly, I've started when people ask me what I do, I say I'm a podcast host and I speak at conferences and on webinars. And they're like, "Oh, wow. Oh, tell me about your podcast." And eventually it comes out that I'm a CPA and I have a specialty in lease accounting. But I've learned to not lead with that because it's incredibly boring sounding based on the stereotypical accountant. And, it's funny also, you mentioned that there are professions that have a more of a stereotype of being altruistic, right? Like a physician. I'll tell this story very quickly. I kind of hit pause on my accounting career at one point. This has been over 10 years ago now, but I got accepted to medical school. And it was for this very reason, George. I felt like that dealing with numbers was not helping people. I just had this, maybe you call it a midlife crisis. I don't know. But yeah, I had found out about a program for career changers at the University of Louisville, quit my job at a big company in accounting, moved from Atlanta to Louisville and started that medical school program. While I was there, I got the dream opportunity in that context. I was the basically the CFO of the atherosclerosis, atherothrombosis. See, I don't even say those words very confidently now, but uh, I work for a cardiologist who led the intensive care unit, cardiac intensive care unit He had a research lab actually trying to find biomarkers to predict heart attacks. And he had a clinical operation. And I was his CFO. And he came and he thanked me every day. He said, Matt, basically, your knowledge of accounting is helping me make decisions for my practice that's saving lives. It's a huge eye-opening experience for me that maybe I wish I hadn't had to quit my job, move my family across the country to get that. But hey, it's been well worth it. And actually, around that same time, the lease accounting rules changed. I had been working in lease accounting for a long time at that point already. And I was very excited about helping people transition to the new lease accounting rules. And so I decided, hey, you know what? I think I overcorrected here. I don't need to be a doctor. I don't need to be a physician to help people with my profession. And as I mentioned before, I am now very passionate about what I do, and I see it as a career that helps people. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Matt, just to add on that great story, the more we talk, the more we learn about you. So your life is incredible. It brings to mind, it's not exactly on point, but I think it's germane. And I think this is a true story. I could be wrong, but President Kennedy, when he was president, was I think in the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and he was taking a tour of some sort, and he came across a gentleman, I think it was a gentleman that was, like a janitor type person. And the president asked this gentleman, what do you do here? And the person, I think this is a great line. It's so good, it's almost maybe hard to believe it is true, but I think it is true. He responds, well, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. On one level, you think, hey, you cleaning things, which is critically important, but the way, maybe to your point, how the physician kind of was thinking about the role you were playing, it wasn't just as an accountant. You were actually helping him and this organization do the great work that they were doing. And without you there, it may not have been possible. So without this gentleman doing his responsibilities, taken to extreme, maybe there wouldn't have been a man on the moon like we have. So it's just, and I think auditing and accounting fits into that. It may not be the person that developed the app or developed the cure or a medical device, but without someone keeping the books, keeping track of grants or awards or that activity, or doing the audits of those companies by extension, they may not have been successful in developing that medical device that saves immeasurable lives. So it's critically important. That's a powerful story you had.
Thank you for the encouragement. That's what the profession needs right now, is more of us, not just you and me, but everybody listening, talking about the profession in this way. Thank you for listening to the Lease Alert. I'd be grateful if you would like and subscribe wherever you listen. Until next time, keep learning and leasing.